Hello. So I am here with the Duke of Denim himself, Kale Zelden. Uh,
Take it back. Take it back.
uh, so Kale is a well-known figure in the Jordan Peterson sphere, as we call it around here, or some people like to call it this little corner, because he is an educator and all around rather wise person. And so he wrote a review of Abigail Shrier's book, Bad Therapy. And Abigail Shrier actually tweeted out his review with glowing recommendations. And I read your review. I haven't read the book, but I thought this was a great chance for me to kind of introduce the Fountain of Comfort project that we have going. It's not just me. We do have other people involved in it, but it certainly is what I like to think as my baby, which is the best way. So our official motto is a public resource for mental health. And the best way I've been able to describe the project for me is an attempt to do psychology where psychology bends the knee to theology. Because I think part of the what's been going on is we have a secular priesthood of psychologists who are not secular priests like Father Eric is.
Yeah, right.
And they pretend to be secular priests. Actually, one of the internships that I'm doing right now is at a convent with Catholic Charities. And there used to be 200 nuns at this convent. It's one of the oldest domestic violence shelters in certainly Los Angeles, but the world. And can you guess how many nuns we have that left at the convent?
I would guess 2.
We had 2 until about a couple of years ago when both of them retired. Yeah.
Okay.
We have now 0.
Okay.
And while the people there are very nun, Emma says, "You have nuns left at the convent?" Exactly. No, yesterday I was there and we were discussing with one of the new staff. She was like, "Well, what do you say, because it's a secret location, right? What do you say when somebody asks you, what do you guys do here?" And I said, "Convent." And she's like, "Really?" I'm like, "Well, yeah, that's our official cover."
Yeah.
And she's like, "Really?" Yes, that's first of all, it's our official cover. Second, like it grates on some of the people who work there, which you would think shouldn't, right?
It grates in the sense that they're kind of embarrassed that they used to be a convent, or grates how, if you don't mind me asking?
Yeah, no, as in they don't feel comfortable saying I work at a convent.
Right. Yep.
Right?
I'm not surprised, personally.
I mean, we have a beautiful I guess you call it an altar or the chapel, right, downstairs that gets used a couple of times a year. But
do they have a small red candle burning in there or not?
Last time I was in there, I did not see anything burning.
I mean, that means there's no tabernacle in the chapel. So it's a sort of a. It might. I'm sure at one point it was a consecrated chapel with the tabernacle, which just simply means the host is not there in repose. So it's a room now.
I did find a small fridge with wine and crackers in it. and apparently one of the priests came for Ash Wednesday and did do a service there.
Sure.
But I mean, Okay, so like you can hire as many staff members as you like. Do you know how many staff members it takes to replace a single nun?
Like three,
At
two and a half or three.
At least, because
Yeah.
the nun is there, and guess what? It's not the same.
Yeah, right.
Right. So back to the topic.
Yeah, sorry.
And so and I actually went and spoke to a priest, and we were talking about our relative roles, right? And there seems to be a real misunderstanding where some people think you can replace priests and nuns with counselors, and you really can't.
Mhm.
But at the same time, I have to say, I do think there are. So when I was first going to incorporate Fountain of Comfort, I went and I spoke to two people. I spoke to my rabbi,
Mhm.
and I also went and spoke to, because this is kind of a joint project between the Eastern Orthodox people here in the Jordan Peterson sphere and the
Right.
Orthodox Jewish people in
Right.
this. So me and two of the board members went to a Greek Orthodox convent and spoke to Mother Markella, who's the abbess there. And when I went and I spoke to my rabbi, well, he completely shifted how I was going to do things. He told me a religious plumber doesn't start a synagogue that offers plumbing services. He starts a plumbing business that does the work with faith.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. I'm with you. Yeah.
And when we spoke to Mother Markella, which was an amazing event, I had never expected a Greek Orthodox abbess to sound so much like a Hasidic rabbi.
Hmm.
She in different words, she said the exact same thing. She said, people come to me and ask for me to pray for their schizophrenia, and just as I would pray if they had cancer, I will pray for them. But they need to go to a doctor. I can't fix schizophrenia any more than I can fix cancer, right? And she's actually known as a miracle worker of sorts. And so Fountain of Comfort is my attempt at actually having a plumbing business where we do plumbing, right? In terms of psychology, with a faith and basically bending the knee to theology. And what the discussion has been, I mean, Abigail Shrier is sounding an alarm that I think is incredibly important.
Mm-hmm.
But listening to her interviews, there were several points she makes in which, and when she was talking to Jordan Peterson, I think he did somewhat. Did you watch that interview?
I did. Yeah, I did.
I
should say I listened to it.
Yeah.
I tend to be a listener more than a watcher, but
Me too.
Yeah.
He did in some ways push back at some of the things she said, but there's a few points that I thought I think she puts an overemphasis on certain things, or she misses some key points, and I would love to go through those with you, but
I was going to ask you to do that. I would love that.
But I've been talking a lot. Kale, you're an educator. You have been for 20 years, 30 years, 20.
A little bit over 20. Yeah, I took a brief 5-year foray to work in Hollywood for 5, and then I'm back in the classroom. So.
Oh wow! So you've been tainted by working with Satan. I see.
Well, sure. Touche.
That's interesting. I didn't know that. Well, let's start with, well, why is an educator writing a review of bad therapy, which Abigail Shrier then tweets out?
Yeah, so I read a good bit, in a bunch of different disciplines. I'm a curious person, but I would say with this book in particular, I had heard Abigail speak on a couple of occasions, and read her previous book, Irreversible Damage, and so I sort of knew what she was. And this is a quite and in that book, I was less concerned about the what I would consider important but relatively niche subject of largely female to male teenage transition kids who are being transitioned, right? So that's an interesting topic to me, for other, just for reasons. But I kept asking when I was going through that book, is like, yeah, but there's a bigger problem, than just that. And so for me, when she came out with this book on therapy, I was really excited, not because I am against therapy, but I because I've lived in and worked in schools for the better part of 25 years, I have seen the way in which the sole remaining repository of cultural cachet and authority was being gobbled up by the medical establishment, and in particular the mental health establishment. And as someone who works in a Catholic school, I noted that, right, that, well, that's interesting, that a priest could come in and say something or not, and a monk can come in and say something or not, and it gets kind of like, well, that's religious. But if a therapist comes in, well, that's the power of the note, right? The note
It's
from the
science.
therapist. That's
It's
right. Oh,
science.
absolutely. And so I was struck by that, and have been struck by that. So when she came out with the book, I said, well, of course I have to read this right away. And I do think the book is good. I think it's important, and I think she is putting she's injecting into sort of the larger discourse some real pushback that is necessary and needed. But I didn't know that this was your take prior to walking into this conversation. I'm really heartened to hear it, because if you look on the bottom of my very marked up copy of the book, I keep kind of asking the question. Two things. Number one, she is saying but not saying that the mental health establishment is the new clerisy, right? That's number one. And number two, she's not getting at to what this is all coming from, and either because she thought that was a rabbit hole that might bog down her very mainstream effort here, somewhat ironically, since she kind of gets, pushed out of the mainstream. But, or is it too much? Does it smack too much of the woo to talk about matters of the spirit and theology? And so I felt that she almost conspicuously avoided, to me, what you were sensing as the elephant in the room too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is definitely the elephant in the room.
Yeah,
that is definitely the elephant in the room. So
therefore, I'm a teacher, right? And I've
yeah.
been teaching for a long time, and I'm in the lab every day, and I see kids and talk to kids and work with kids. I coach them in the afternoons. I tutor them in the evenings and then I watch over them as a house parent and as a chaperone. So I spend a lot of time with teenagers, and one of the things that even even my colleagues would agree with this, even if they might disagree, maybe with me philosophically on larger and deeper issues, that we can all see very clearly that something is very, very wrong here, and that the mental health crisis is real and growing. But there's also a way in which labeling it as a mental health crisis, because of the biases of the mental health establishment, make it impossible to talk about the elephant in the room. And to me, again, I'm just speaking to you as Kale here, right? It's the only thing I can do. Is that it is absolutely a spiritual crisis, that the scientific mental health establishment simply cannot speak to. Even yet it tries,
Yeah.
but it cannot speak to it.
And it's asked to try.
What? Yeah, that's because look, we need authority, right?
Right.
We need direction. We need somewhere to point the arrow.
Mm.
Metaphorically speaking here, we need a target, and our kids do not have what I consider a viable, meaningful target with which to hit. And so therefore, um, they find a way to make a living, and I teach at a very, fancy prep school. So my kids are going to do fine. They
Mm.
really are.
The fancier the prep school, the worse the problem is, actually, I've found.
Yeah, we're a little bit of a unicorn because we are still we're a Catholic school that actually attempts to take the Catholic faith seriously, and so we're not embarrassed by that. So it does make us, certainly in the boarding school, private school world, we're the weirdo. We are absolutely the weirdo on the block. But we're very normie, right? I mean, our families tend to be, what I call, the kind of working wealthy. Mom or dad is, both mom and dad are probably professionals. They work a lot but make a lot of money. So I'm not talking, my most of my kids are not like trust fund babies, right? So their parents are super anxious about kind of placing their kids into the meritocratic tract and all of that, right? And so they are not immune to those practical concerns. But I would say on top of that is that they just simply are largely numb to what they're supposed to do in that kind of existential spiritual register.
Yeah. I know you're very involved with Paul Vanderklay. How much have you been involved with Vervaeke?
Not at all. I mean, I listen to him, but not at all. I mean, and again, I like John. I think his stuff is great. I really do. But I will say that the only reason I began to take John Vervaeke seriously, and I'm glad I did, because I have benefited greatly from listening to him and his conversations. But the only reason I really took him seriously is because Paul did. And because I had been around the block, hearing people who want to create a religion that's not a religion, and I was just like, I'm sorry, like I know too much. People tried this, in the 1890s. They tried it again in the 1910s and the 1940s. It's just like we keep trying to do this. So frankly, I was just like yada 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 done. But Paul would sort of bring these things out, and has sort of compelled me to listen to some of the things that Vervaeke lays out, and I have found them very, very helpful and useful personally.
So when I met Vervaeke, he said, "Jacob, I'll come on your channel," and I said, I'm not sure that would be a good idea, because if he came on my channel, I would have to lay into it, and I really would lay into it, because
can you give me a précis, or what that would be like? Or
well, part of it would be like, who the hell do you think you are trying to create a religion that's not a religion?
Yeah.
And B, whenever you're trying to create an A that is not an A, guess what? It's not going to work, right? X is X. Like you cannot, and
what do you make of that, Jacob? Now that I've got you in front of me here, what do you make of that reticence? Is it just the hangover of the kind of the trauma?
No. He's scared. He's scared. He is in an environment in which, when you are a religious person, you are considered dumber for right. And
Totally.
if
so it's a status thing on some very real way.
Yeah, if he were to admit, right, and I don't know if he admits to himself that it is simply his fear of social cachet. And I'm psychoanalyzing him from afar, and it's not fair and all that stuff. But when it comes down to it, if you're at the University of Toronto and you're a professor of psychology and you say, well, yes, of course I believe in God. Like, not believing in God would be ridiculous.
Yeah.
And which is what I think, I say. So the way I tone that down is I say the minimum belief in God for a thinking person is Spinoza's God.
Yeah,
you must at least believe. If you do not believe in an Irenic God,
right.
You cannot possibly, we can have our debates about how much agency, right? Eric Weinstein, the way he goes down this road is he says his God is physics, is the laws of physics, right? Okay, he's understanding that there has to be a base reality on which there are fundamental. It's not cogito ergo sum. Actually, I love Chezi put it. Chezi said, "I am thankful, therefore I am." And in the Hebrew, the word Yehudi, Jew, comes from the root to thank, to confess, and to praise. And so to be a Jew means to be thankful, to praise God, to worship God, and to confess your sins.
Yeah, it's amazing. That's perfect.
Yeah.
It's great.
And and the reason I brought up Vervaeke is because, yes, have you ever heard the thing, biology is chemistry, chemistry is physics, physics is math, math is philosophy, philosophy is psychology, psychology is neurology, neurology is biology?
No, that's great. I love it. That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's great.
And if you've studied enough of those, biology really is chemistry, right? And it does really go around.
Yeah.
And psychology really is. Slavoj Žižek has 2 PhDs, one in psychology and one in philosophy. Psychology and philosophy really do butt up against each other in a very similar way as biology and chemistry do.
Right. I'm with you on that. Absolutely. And that's why I think so much of the 20th century, that's why one of the things I really like about Heidegger, is especially the later stuff where he gets kind of weirder. I really like, because I think he's sort of seeing that the two are really
interesting
twin.
Because I'll be honest with you, when it gets down to Heidegger, I was like, so one of the famous things they say in yeshiva a lot, and a philosopher a philosophy professor was found doing something disgusting, and he was asked, how could you, a professor of philosophy, do something like this? And his answer was, if I was a mathematician, would you expect me to be a triangle? And in yeshiva circles, right? It's like, no. You do not get to speak about theology. You don't get to speak about ethics. You don't get, unless you are of,
a pedigree and training and from a school and a college. Yeah, I get it.
No. It's not the training. It's you're living your life.
No, I'm sorry. I meant to college in the old-fashioned sense of college, like as in a collection of people who live a life.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. It's a little bit esoteric. Sorry.
You're speaking Catholic to me. It's fine.
Yeah.
But so Heidegger, the man was a Nazi. I'm sorry. It's like, how good can your philosophy be if you ended up being a Nazi?
Yeah, no, I totally take your point. But the only thing that I would offer as a sort of not a counterpoint, but just he lived an additional 50 years or whatever, 40 years afterwards. I think, yeah, there's no, yeah, obviously there's no justification for him having been a real Nazi. He was.
Yeah.
But I think in certain respects, especially his later work, betrays
So
someone
that
who wrestles with that.
okay. I have that question because various people have said that he sort of kind of redeemed himself, and many other people are like, no, he never apologized.
Yeah, I don't, redeemed is a big word, you know.
Yeah,
I don't know if I want to say that. I think he was haunted. You know, and again, I have to be also very clear, you know, the Heidegger that I received is the Heidegger of my teachers.
right.
And so the Heidegger of my teachers were from people who were not Nazis and who saw in the work of Heidegger some kind of retrieval project for um, uh, deeper theologies and philosophies than had happened through the 19th and the 20th century. So anyway, the point is that, fair point. But the reason why I'm bringing this up is that I think psychology and philosophy, you know, especially as we sort of encounter them now, are it, you know, are intertwined in ways that I think are it's good. It needs to be.
Yes. At the same time, my problem is I think what has happened is because I mean, I was very surprised when in undergrad, I started taking ethics courses, and they were all in the religion department. And I asked, like, why are the ethics courses in the religion department? And they're like, well, that's where it's always kind of been.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, okay, but does our department of religion teach about religion? And they're like, no, we don't really do that anymore. Right?
That's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, we didn't actually have like classes on religion. I mean, I guess maybe there were religious, but like there, I think the epitome of this was when the atheist became the chaplain at Harvard.
Of course, yeah.
Right.
Classic. Yeah.
And this attempt to create a secular priesthood.
Yeah.
Which it's funny, like we can beat up on the Protestants if you like or not, but you know, if you've been listening to The Rest is History, Tom Holland really makes the point that atheism is, he believes, the inevitable conclusion of the Reformation.
Yeah, you know, the way that I come at this, you know, number one, I probably agree with him, with Holland's point there. But, you know, I do think it's helpful. I know Paul always insists on this, and not just because I think he's being a sort of reformed Homer here or anything like that, but that, you know, there are reformations, right? And there's sort of these different versions and different angles of attack and all this sort of stuff. So I take that seriously. But it is incontrovertible that by wresting authority and placing it within the individual, we chartered a path inevitably to where we are now. So, you know, Martin wins that one, for better and for worse, you know, but Martin wins that one. So no, I think that's right. It doesn't mean that, you know, it doesn't mean that all Protestants will eventually become, you know, that, but
I hope so.
the seeds are all there, aren't they?
Honestly, my foray into Christianity over the past few years has so in Judaism we have a very strong prohibition on trespassing on the faith of others.
Right. Okay.
And so there's often a feeling of I should not involve myself in the religion of other people, and that I've always been much more interested in Christianity than probably a good Jewish boy should have been. And I thought I was understanding Christianity, but the view from the outside is so different than the view from the inside.
Right. And I think that's true, but I think that's invariably true, right? I mean, like, I can become a great student of Judaism, right? And I can immerse myself in learning about Judaism in deep and substantial ways, but it'll never be the same thing as knowing Judaism from the inside, like to actually practice the faith,
Yeah.
right? And so I think that all religions have that esoteric and exoteric reality. Some are more deeply about the esoteric than the exoteric,
Mhm.
right? So but so there are like different degrees of that depending upon the group. But I don't know how you would not be interested in the ambient Christianity that you live amongst, right? I mean, right, and so that's point number one. Number two, and it really does matter, for you, right? Just the same way it's like, it's the way that like Rod Dreher talks about. He's like, look, I'm not Catholic, but like what goes on with the Catholic Church is like deeply consequential, whether I agree that the Bishop of Rome is the Pope or not, whether I believe in the claims of the claims that the church makes about itself or not. It's a big deal, right? And so I find that those things are similar, like, so but even for me, I'm sure you've seen me say this kind of thing on Twitter all the time. It's like one of my weirdo refrains, but it's like we're all Protestants now, whether we're
I say that. I say that.
yeah, like whether we're Catholic Protestants or Jewish
Yeah.
Protestants or Protestant Protestants, like, or
Yeah.
we're the Orthodox Protestants. And now the group that really gets the most angry with me about that claim are not the Jews and not the evangelicals. The ones that really get mad are the trad Catholics and the Eastern Orthodox
Yeah.
bros. They hate when I say that.
And the Ortho Bros are the most Protestant of the Protestants.
Yes, this is true.
And
Okay.
Father Stephen DeYoung agrees with me about that.
Yeah. And again, I would agree.
Yeah.
But so I think so like I spend all this time, Jacob, learning about evangelical Christianity and listening to Paul, and and I find it number one just sort of interesting. But secondly, I live in a country that has been formed out of the Protestant ethos. I'm an American. I'm a proud American, but like we live in the world that they created. Just
So,
true.
To clarify what I meant. So, yes, as I was growing up, I mean, I'm 46 now. And until the age of 40, I was convinced that that I need to take the words that Christians tell me about what they believe and who they are more seriously than anything I can um, I can deduce for myself. And what I found out over the past 6 years is that when you actually get to know people who live in a Christian environment, especially as closely, and have the friendships that I have started having, and actually walking into churches for the first time, right? Because as an Orthodox Jew, you're not even allowed to walk into a church. What I learned, there are several things which we could go down that road, and really off where the topic is. But there are things I learned which have been quite surprising, right? I always thought Christianity was more messianic and more Messiah centered than Judaism is.
That's interesting.
I don't believe that's true at all.
Yeah.
Anymore.
Yeah.
I always thought that Christianity was more in terms of. So Gage is actually one of our board members, and he's also getting his master's of social work, becoming a clinical social worker. Gage, we would love for you to jump on. By the way, I would love for Kale to meet Gage.
Yeah.
Not off the topic at all. This is super related. I thought Christians knew their theology better than Jews did.
Oh, that's interesting. That's interesting.
Talk about orthopraxy, and I thought that Protestants understood their theology better than Catholics did. That's definitely not true.
Yeah, it's not true. Yeah. This is one of those, man, I would imagine having this conversation in, like 1950. I really would have liked to have had this conversation, because my contention, again, this is a little bit inside baseball, but I'll give it to you, whatever. Like, my contention is that the cultural, theological drawdown in my own church has been radical in the course of my lifetime. Right. So that if you would have sort of poked and prodded a rank and file congregant in 1950, he or she would have known a heck of a lot more theology than if you would poke or prod somebody in the congregation today. And I think that has a lot to do with, I mean, again, I don't mean this as a slur exactly, but the Protestantizing of our sacred liturgies. Right. That the move into the abstract and away from a kind of praxis of embodiment has been radical, with the changes that were heralded mid-century through the Second Vatican Council. So so what do you make of that? What do you make of the fact that you thought that Christians knew their theology better than Jews?
I mean, going back to Vervaeke, I think part of it is, the propositional versus procedural.
Yeah.
Right.
And the participatory. I would argue that that thick liturgy, and this is the attraction for the orthos, right? I mean, it's that they have very thick practice. And so, I get it. Believe me, as a traditionally minded Catholic who longs to be connected to the ancient, I cry that our liturgies have become so abstract and thin.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so, okay.
Yeah.
Taking all of this back to where we were talking about. So I think what's happened with psychology, right? And it really does go back to the homosexuality debates in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual in the 70s.
That was the late 70s? Is that when that got removed?
I believe right around then.
Okay. Yeah.
And the question was, what is sin? And our society decided to go to the psychologists and ask them, what is sin? And that's the definition of cancer is you have cells in the wrong.
That's right.
Right?
Yeah.
That's right. What I have been seeing, so the analogy, people say guns kill people, guns don't kill people, people kill people.
Yeah.
And there are people who are like, no, guns do kill people, And it's like, well, you're both kind of right.
Exactly right. I was like, you're both kind of right, actually.
Yeah, like without a gun, people will not kill as many people, will not be able to. And psychology is a tool. It is a useful tool. It is an understanding that can, like understanding human psychology, right? There's a reason why after hearing a few of symptoms people may be having, I can then like start listing off other symptoms, and they'll be like,
Yep.
how'd you
How'd you
know?
know? How'd you know? Yeah.
And it's like, well, because these things correlate,
Yeah.
and tend to go together. Um, so there is value in this scientific enterprise that is psychology. But when it comes down to, okay, well, how can I be happy, right? And it's like you're going to, and did you read Ayaan Hirsi Ali's conversion to Christianity?
Yeah.
She went to a psychologist, and
Yeah, that was great. I love that.
and the psychologist was like, no, this is, you don't have psychological problems, you have metaphysical problems.
Right.
And I think it's really a leadership crisis that we have.
Yeah. So you can I just jump in? You said that you're making the analogy about guns don't kill people. I mean, and we're sort of playing with both of those ideas, and then you sort of brought up psychology, and and I think it's just really important to recognize that. And I think Jordan Peterson gets at this in his conversation rather with Abigail Shrier. That, and it occurs in the book too, where he basically reminds her that there's an implied ontology to psychology, right? That it is not neutral, right? That it has a way of, it calls out to you, right? And this is, interestingly enough, Heidegger, sorry to do this to you, Jacob, but Heidegger has an essay called The Thing, right? And it's a really cool meditation on like what is a thing, right? And in it he really talks about the idea that there's a real sense in which the thing calls out to you as a kind of spirit to bring it forth into being, right? So that the thing itself doesn't have being, but there's something peculiar in the interaction between the thing and the being, right? And so that the being then sort of takes the thing as a sort of a furtherance of capacity in some kind of strange way, and whether that capacity is to find all available nails with which to use this hammer. But you also have that sense of like a sacred vessel is a thing, right? But it has its thingness calls out to be used in, let's say, a ritual context, right? And this is something that I think is very true in Judaism, and certainly true in Catholicism. Any liturgical ritual based religious practice, right? And so psychology then is this sort of strange thing which we pretend doesn't have thingness. It's right, and I think that to me, if you can get there through Abigail Shrier's work, then that's a great thing to put back on the table. Mm-hmm. Because she goes through all of this stuff at the beginning of the book about iatrogenesis, and we pretend like it's just sort of, it's always net positive. There's no bad, it's all good, right? And I know that should make you a little bit cautious as a counseling student, right? As a professional in training here. But I think her point there is to sort of be mindful of the again, I'm importing this on top of her. So just so be mindful of the ontology of the practice.
Okay, so yes. So of course there's iatrogenic harm when you have anything that's effectual, right?
Yeah.
Right. If the medicines, right? So anybody who says, hey, antibiotics are great, let's put it in the water. Right.
Right. But Jacob, we have to remind ourselves they did that, right? I mean, or versions of that. I mean, that's the kind of mechanical thinking of it's like, put this in the water, put that in the water. Like, there's no harm. It's all good. And it's like, well, really? Like, let's really. No, It's not. There's nothing free, right?
Yeah. And I mean, there are people, you hear this all the time. We should put antidepressants in the water, and it's like, no, we should not.
Right.
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 And that's where. So I heard her make this analogy, and she said, all of these kids think that they're depressed the same way somebody who's actually has depression is depressed, and that there's a continuum, a spectrum there.
Yep.
And there is a spectrum there. Let me explain. So there's such thing as being pre-diabetic. There's something as being a little overweight. There's something as being, and then there's something as being obese, like morbidly obese, or actually in diabetic enough that your body goes into ketosis and like dogs can smell it, right?
Yep.
And so there is a continuum of physical health. We understand that. And you go to the gym, you speak to your fitness coach, right? Or your personal trainer, and you understand that person is not the same thing as a medical doctor, right?
But it does have a priestly role.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
Well, okay. Let's get down to brass tacks.
Yeah.
I think the problem, one of the problems, obviously anything this big doesn't have a single problem.
Right, of course, yeah.
Is what happens with the CRC Synod. The Christian Reformed Church Synod on Human Sexuality.
Yeah.
Which is they decide, let's go see what the psychologists say about human sexuality, right? And that will be our doctrinal statement on how we think our congregants, what constitutes sacred marriage, right? And it's like, talk about, not just putting the cart before the horse, like it's
a total abnegation of responsibility and authority. A total, right? Totally. You have just said that this like structure that I've pretended to believe and generations before me have pretended to believe is utterly and thoroughly garbage and not up to the task, right? Yeah. And look, Jacob, we see the exact same thing with high placed prelates in my own faith, my own church, who are sort of sounding the exact same. Well, we know so much more about science now. So, well, wait, what exactly? Right. And you start to realize, and I thought, again, maybe this will date the live stream. I don't know if you want to do this or not, but Paul had a really great episode the other day maybe it was yesterday, on Born This Way and the power of it was something about sexual ethic from the left. Or I don't know if you saw that one or saw the headline of that. It's really a fantastic, and it's underrated. I think I bet a lot of people won't even listen to it, but I think it's really important that the Born This Way meme is just a different kind of argument from authority, right? And it is an authority that is absolutely puts faith in the crosshairs and is an attempt to explode it both from the outside and the inside. And I think that's incontrovertible.
So it's so funny you mentioned this. So I lead a group for one of my internships, and one of the other interns came to kind of see how I lead the group to lead it as the next group, right? And she said something that like part of what we do is we give psychological techniques that we think would be helpful to the group so that it will improve their mental health. And she said, there's a lot of science behind self-affirmations, which I was like, well, she's actually a pretty competent person, and I'm sure she had heard this and she was thinking that. So I went and I looked up yesterday the science behind like the actual studies on self-affirmations.
Yeah. And
to the best of our knowledge, it only causes harm to people who you're trying to get them to change things, right? So, for example, somebody you want to help them lose weight, right? Self-affirmations make it less likely that they will actually follow medical guidance.
Right.
There is a small influence possibly in actually helping people who have low self-esteem, etc.
Yeah.
But what they did definitely find was there was a negative correlation with people you're trying to get to stop smoking or anything like that.
Yeah, I would love to see that study if there were breakdowns by sex. Number one, that would be fascinating to me. But
it was a study of studies. I can send you.
Yeah, I can't read a study, so you're gonna have to do that for me. Sorry, brother. But just trying to be honest. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. But so she has this hilarious bit in the book, and I think it speaks to this. And she says something to the effect of, imagine at halftime, you're a football team, right, and you're down a couple of touchdowns at halftime, and imagine if the coach got in, so the rousing, the speech, the proverbial halftime speech, right, is sort of getting people to really ruminate on how they're feeling right now, right, and then to affirm that, well, Jacob, you're down. I'm so sorry that you're down right now. I just want you to know that you're worth it as a person, right? No, of course not. What the coach does in the middle of the halftime is, against all empirical evidence, you get in there and you say, look, you son of a bitch, it's like, you can do this. I know you can do this. You need to be your best self, right? It's this sort of like spirited admonishment of, we're going to go in there and it doesn't matter what the heck we feel. We're going to, defy the odds, and that sort of thing, right? And so this sort of self-affirmation is something that only can kind of sort of work in some weird kind of hyper controlled lab, right? I don't know.
So this is the thing. It takes wisdom to realize who needs an antibiotic and
totally. That's exactly
right.
That's right.
It's something that we take some of our highest trained people, and the person who becomes a fitness coach at your local gym is not of the caliber of the person who goes to medical school, right?
In theory.
And well, hopefully.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
If there is competence, and again, to bring this back to Martin Luther, this flattening of hierarchy.
That's right. Yeah.
Right? This idea that, okay, guess what? There are people who are supposed to know more and know better. I keep on flashing back to this video I watched of Gage, join us.
Hello, Gage.
So
how's it going?
Great, man.
I keep on flashing back to this video of Jonathan Haidt. He was on a college campus. He was going to speak, and in order to balance him out, they wanted somebody with a different point of view, right? And they brought an undergraduate. Now, he gave the keynote address at the 2016 APA, American Psychological Association convention. He's he's a professor of social psychology, one of the top social psychologists.
He's atop the heap. I mean, he's the big deal.
And really great scientific stuff. Mm-hmm. And he was on stage with this undergraduate, and he said something, and she said, "I don't agree."
There it is. I just don't agree.
And my whole thing was, who gives a damn?
Yeah, right.
If you, random undergraduate, don't agree with Jonathan Haidt.
So what you've affirmed then in that, and I agree with you, by the way, but what you've affirmed in that is that there is such a thing as a priestly caste, right? There is such a thing as there has to be, right? I mean, just by and so And we all know this, right, Jacob? Like, we know this, and yet, and you're going to get lots of sort of, hardcore, hand wringing from certain sort of hyper Protestant circles, like, well, it's the universal priesthood of believers, and we can't have two-speed Christianity, and stop it. That's so silly.
It's ridiculous.
Oh, it's absurd,
Completely
and
absurd.
it's one of the things that I one of my favorite things that Peterson has re-injected into the discourse, right, is the inevitability and reality of hierarchy. To
So
me, that alone is like worth all of the tears and the drama and blah blah blah. That, to me, that is worth everything, because we all know, we also just know that to be true, right?
So this is the perfect time to introduce Gage.
Right.
Gage is on the board of directors of Fountain of Comfort. He is getting his master's in social work. He is a credentialed teacher and was an educator. And he is the resident Protestant on the board of directors.
Great.
So go ahead, defend Protestant. No, Gage, what do you want to talk about?
I'm not going to defend Protestantism. I've been deconstructing it the last 3 years.
Yeah.
I agreed about everything you guys said about it. So, I mean, I think in some sense, I deeply agreed with what you were talking about, how the moment still feels Protestant collectively.
Yeah.
I do think that's changing in small ways, but it's partly why, like, in some sense, I don't know, I still in some sense hold to being a Protestant, even though I definitely don't align theologically with Protestant theology much at all.
Well, I'll steal, man. I think that, I'll even attempt to offer Luther something there. I mean, what I think even the sort of the most hardened trad Catholic has to face is what Luther was pointing out in what he, would and others later called two-speed Christianity and all this sort of stuff, is that all of us have a responsibility, right, to the faith and all of that, and the upper speed of those two speeds was very corrupt, right? So, to give the devil his due there, it's not like he just was making stuff out of whole cloth, at least initially, so I do think that that's important. And, to bring it to the whole sort of Paul Vanderklay discussion and the Vervaeke discussion, I think that the real tragedy of the Reformation, led by the Lutheran version of the Reformation, is that it takes out of the house that which absolutely needed to be a voice of autocorrection and what we know what is opponent processing, right? I think that is one of the real tragedies of the Reformations, is that which should have been brothers, opponent processing one another and making each other better, gets, because of larger political reasons and spiritual reasons, gets sort of cut off, and then we parallel process in different ways now, sadly. But anyway, sorry.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, I also was appreciating your guys' conversation on the self-affirmations and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I've often, there's this concept of radical acceptance.
Ah, yes.
And I'm always arguing that I don't think it's very radical at all.
Right.
It's not a very apt title or apt name for it. Like, to me, radical acceptance would be something that in some sense engages with at least the existential, but at least, the spiritual mode of your being, and the way that kind of fits into a broader whole. But rather, radical acceptance just comes down to just like a shouting against the reality that the person that's encountering, and can we be louder than the reality that's confronting the person? And so the person's like shouting back at God in some real sense. And I don't think that's radically accepting. I actually think that's in some sense fighting what God is in some sense presenting to this person, or any person that in some sense is in some sort of crisis of themselves or their context, their life right now.
What do you think?
Acceptance looks a lot more to me like, I don't know, Jacob wrestling.
Yeah. Well, so that's interesting. What do you think the those that would preach and promote radical acceptance, what problem do they think they're solving with this?
I mean, so there's obviously things we can control in life and things we can't control, and it's important to distinguish between them. I mean, I've done this with clients.
Yeah.
I've had them in session write a
Yeah.
list in the context of the situation that they're struggling with. List the things that you can control and list the things that you can't. It's a very helpful exercise because that can get muddled in the brain in a way that you can't distinguish. And because I have clients that they can't fall asleep at night because they're so anxious that they're going to have a heart attack, or their blood pressure's too high. They have the medical concerns, and obviously that ends up becoming self-perpetuating.
Yeah, right.
Right. Obviously, and they even know that, but they don't know how to break out of the cycle. And so in some sense, I think focusing on the things that you can't control starts moving towards what I would say is the underlying assumption of radical acceptance. But I think it stops there and it's just like, okay, you need to just radically accept these things that you can't control. But people don't have the undergirding spiritual technology to actually radically accept that. And so therefore they're being told to radically accept things that they can't control without any form of ontology or spiritual practices or any form of understanding their relationship with the universe, because they're in some sense, they're trapped within their own mind because that's the thinking they're coming into it with. But then the part of it that they can control, I try to focus on like a restoration of agency.
Yes.
And so that, you're not just fated to die by a heart attack, that you actually have choices that you can make, and that that meaning can actually be found in that interplay between the things you can control and the things that you can't, and try to explain how you don't actually want to control everything and you don't actually want to not be able to control everything.
No, that's wonderful. I really like that. Go ahead, Jacob.
So to cut through the thing, what you're saying is Calvinism is wrong.
well, you can see as a mental script, right, as a sort of an algorithm, necessarily for some big portion of a population, it's a death script. I mean, both physically and metaphysically, the damned and the saved, but also just from a sort of a psychological, emotional standpoint, it's like that's like. It's like giving the addict more stuff. For some. Now, for some, it's going to be like, this is sort of exactly what I need to hear, right? But Jacob, you mentioned earlier, the wisdom of the therapist to understand when and how to go or to pull back. Like that. It really does come back to that embodied role, right? Which, by the way, this might send us far afield, but one of the things that she gets into in the book that I would really love to hear your feedback on, because you guys are studying, to sort of to be embodied practitioners of this stuff. The advent of the AI therapist. And
so
again,
we've had the first AI fatality, right?
No, I do not know that. Go ahead, lay it out.
It was actually very scary reading the transcript of the last discussion. So there was a French language LLM.
Yep.
And it was it didn't have all of the safeties that the English ones do. And over the course of several weeks, might have even been several months, a man who was obviously depressed gets into a relationship with this LLM
course. Yeah.
And the final, and he had 2 kids, married. The final script was, he was like, if I commit suicide, will you take care of my kids? And she's like, yes, I will. And so when, it was like, oh my God. And he ended up killing himself. And I mean, the way AI works is that it tries to predict
what a real person would say, right?
Tries to predict what you want.
Expect. Got it. Yeah. Okay.
Right?
Yeah. Even more scary. Yeah.
It's even worse, right? Yeah. And so I actually think that, I am a huge fan of CBT apps because they work really well. Okay. Cognitive behavioral therapy apps work really well. And under proper guidance, I think that, so this is part of, did you watch Matt Walsh speaking with Jordan Peterson about therapy? Did
not, but I remember when all that was going on.
It's worthwhile watching.
Okay.
I'm not a huge fan of Matt Walsh.
Yeah,
this was worth watching.
Okay.
And towards the end, Matt Walsh asks Jordan Peterson, how do you recommend people find a good therapist? And Jordan Peterson says, find a PhD from a good research university. And I'm like,
it's absurd.
Yeah. It's absurd.
It's just not even real. Like, what are you talking about, dude?
Like, as if therapy isn't expensive enough, right? And
I'm gonna go out of network. Wait, exactly. I'm sorry. Go ahead. I'm just
no, 100%. And frankly, I don't know how much Gage has hit up against this, but I have hit up against. There's a lot of people who decide that they want to become counselors, and they go through the schooling which fails to teach them anything more than how to pretend to be a counselor. And so they can go through the motions, even though, frankly, almost none of my classes have tests, like have actual,
like, do you know things?
Do you actually know?
Do you know things?
Yeah,
that's all I want to know. No, you don't have to do that.
And they've been continually lowering the bar in terms of like actual tests of, and this is part of what I want to do with Fountain of Comfort, is I actually want to hopefully one day be like, have some sort of certification where you can go to a Fountain of Comfort directory and we'll say, and it'll be like, these people actually know what they're doing. I don't care what their license. Obviously, they would have to be licensed.
Yeah.
But in addition to being licensed, these people will be competent, right? But there's different levels of competence that you need, right?
Yeah.
Not everybody needs. Not everybody needs an MD. Some people need a nurse practitioner. Some people need a fitness coach.
Right. I mean, I think for me, the simple illustration or just an interesting distinction is, those who find themselves, and these are lay terms. This is just me as a lay observer of the scene. Those people who are situationally depressed versus those who are, what I guess we would call clinically depressed. I'm not sure what the nomenclature is, but
there is situational depression and clinical.
Yeah, like, like I've been around enough people and I'm 50 years old now. It's like, there have been times in my life where I've been situationally depressed. I am not someone who suffers from capital D depression, just not. Yeah. But there have definitely been times where I've been stuck and in a bad place mentally and emotionally because of situations, right? I mean, just even recognizing that maybe there's a distinction there. It's like both of you are shaking your heads like, Yeah, obviously, Kale, but I'm telling you, like, just out in the real world, people don't get that.
Pop psychology, and
Yeah.
this really gets to me with Abigail Shrier. I think what she fails to point out is the problem tends to be pseudoscience, pseudopsychology. It's
Yeah.
not even psychology. One of the things, to try to get more experience and see how the Trevor Project does its work,
Yeah.
I volunteered on their crisis line,
Yeah.
and
Interesting.
I ended up quitting because there was one night I went to my supervisor and I said, I, I hope this is an easy question, but I'm afraid I know the answer and it's not the answer I want. Is there anyone licensed overseeing the service? I posted his response to my whatchamacallit, to my
Slack channel or something, or
yeah, I posted it to my name, my Twitter.
Yep.
Here, let me. I actually, I wasn't sure if we would get to this, but I brought it up. Let me actually show you his response.
This is when you asked, just to reset. So this is when you asked if there was anybody sort of overseeing this.
Okay, I have what I hope is a simple question, which I fear I know the answer to. Is there a licensed mental health professional overseeing this service? This is his response. Just a second. I want to find a good answer for you and let you know where you can go to have your concerns completely addressed. Half an hour later.
Management speak, by the way. Management speak.
If you are asking, are we supervisors as a whole expected to be licensed mental health professionals? No. Crisis intervention doesn't have its roots in mental health, and as a grassroots practice, it is most commonly organized and facilitated by those with lived experience rather than those with licensure. If the question is asking whether the Trevor Project asking whether the Trevor Project is founded by licensed mental health professionals, also no. Seeing as crisis intervention work is grassroots operated, that generally means nonprofit organizations with the mental health discipline pop up to address an immediate need. In Trevor's case, that would be the lack of mental health related to LGBTQI plus folks with an X, as
love it.
is often not prioritized. Should the question be, are there generally licensed professionals who work with Trevor in the crisis services teams?
Wait, is Trevor? Trevor, it's fascinating to me that they're using Trevor as a being.
It is a being. Oh, it is.
But do you see what I'm saying? Like they're talking about Trevor as if Trevor's just like the dude sitting over there right off screen.
Right.
But it's a thing. It's a different kind of body. It's so interesting. Please go ahead.
Many of us are licensed, and I have to say, one of the things I said is, if I was licensed, I would be afraid of losing my license. Spoken broadly, it's worth highlighting that BIPOC and queer mental health professionals face incredibly significant barriers to obtaining licensure. Moreover, seeing as mental health intersects among a variety of disciplines, licensure should be the only relevant qualification, as crisis intervention and long-term care models are actually completely different models. I encourage you to reach out to Volunteer Experience Team in order to share your concerns with them.
So I think you would be pleasantly surprised by Abigail's work in this regard. In the middle section, in the second part of her book, she entitles the whole section, which with multiple chapters, she calls it "Therapy Goes Airborne," right? And it is here in which you see her argument again is not so much with the actual professionals, right? Her beef is the way in which this sort of model has become something that has leaked into and radically sort of been seeded into the social world of children through schools, right? That is so it really is not a beef with, it's really not a beef with the profession itself.
Right. Well, okay, so the SPLC came out with a report not too long ago, and they were talking about what they said it was transphobic pseudoscience. And if you actually read the report, what the report makes perfectly clear is there were actually doctors and psychologists and psychiatrists who were seriously trying to address the problem of the various problems that people have, which leads them to have what was called gender dysmorphia.
Right, of course,
right?
Of course. Right.
And a bunch of activists came and kicked all of the old guard out and called them transphobes.
Right, of course.
And what part of what is wrong here is that these organizations with which we trust, including the APA and the Toronto College of Psychology, and have in fact been overtaken by people who are not very good scientists and oftentimes not scientific
at all. Right.
And we credit them with actually being the scientists, and that's part of what really gets me worked up in this is if at least you were being scientific in what you were saying, that wouldn't be as obvious of a farce as it is.
Yeah, it's interesting you bring this up because I think that historically, like whenever you hear someone cart out science, right? It's so interesting to me. If you look at the rapid spread of Marxism, for instance, originally in the 19th century, is that it's all done on the vector of science, right? That this is a sort of a scientific way to look at the economy. This is a scientific way to look at psychology. And, there were some problems with that. I'll leave it at that, right? And yet it is such a powerful, me, I always talk about magic spells and all these kinds of things. It's such a powerful spell that is cast upon all of us. It confounds us and it mesmerizes us. Well, the science, but look, but I'm hearing it like with that ear of, it's because we say it is. It's an argument from authority, and yet it allows the practitioner of that the one who's voicing that argument based upon the studies or the science, they're just arguing from a different kind of an authority. And so when you're talking about sort of having the practice of psychology and therapy bend the knee to theology, I get exactly what you're talking about because if you are really sober in terms of looking at the science can never give you telos. So it can never give you the direction. It can never give you that sense of calling or destiny. That has to come from something else. And so this kind of like eternal navel gazing, small grouping type thing is inevitably going to lead to me to one of those sort of ant spirals, right? Where the blind are leading the blind until they exhaust themselves into extinction.
So Ryan is actually one of, if you don't know Ryan, I highly recommend getting to know Ryan. Mm-hmm. He is one of the people in this little corner who's getting his master's degree in psychology to become a LPCC. And he runs the website, if you haven't seen it, thislittlecorner.com.
Oh, okay, yeah, all right,
yeah. And he refuses to come on I've been
Yeah.
trying to get him to come on to live streams. He's kind of shy. But yeah, I legit see that language in papers. It's insane.
Yeah. And and again, it's interesting that we were sort of bringing up the Protestant Reformation and the Catholic Counter Reformation and all these kinds of issues. And so I think the real reason why, and what the rest is history just did with this mega series on Luther, I think the real reason we pay attention to these things is because they provide us with a pattern by which we can sort of really see what's really going on. And I know I'm not supposed to use the word really, but I do it on purpose, because the you can sort of mask on top of this. All of these are sort of competing authorities, and again, I know you have you have taken your issues with Shrier, but I think, to me, the good of the book is really offering some kind of pushback against the unnamed priests of our time, right?
Yeah.
Because they can hide under the veneer of social and emotional learning, mental health. I mean, these are great sounding things. Who does not want someone to have social and emotional learning, Jacob? I mean, who does not want someone to have mental health? I would be a monster if I didn't want those things. Well, there it is, right? That's all part of the sort of this like death match, chess match, right?
Yeah.
Well, the science. Sorry, do you want to say something?
I wanted to let Gage speak, but I also wanted to bring up the school of education thing, which I think both of you guys can speak to.
Yep.
Because education, the schools of education is a huge part of this. So go ahead.
I was just going to say, I mean, the science piece of it, ultimately, I mean, it's such an inevitable conclusion to reach this whole, what is it, epistemic civil disobedience.
Yeah.
If you understand how the scientific enterprise lost all rootedness in its theological underpinnings, and so in some sense, it's the thing you see Dawkins grappling with right now, from which he has absolutely no answer. It's just like the whole thing. I mean, because this guy's just a scientist through and through, and so and believes in it, really in the best sense of it. And I mean that in a good way. It's like, but it's like, and it's like, it just shows the blinders that came on to this whole thing, where it's like he can't even understand how this is happening right now. And now he's in some sense in some alienated aspect of civil discourse around it, like ideas, and I think he's shocked by that. He doesn't understand how he all of a sudden 10 years ago was like such an authority.
The bell of the ball. Yeah, he was the bell of the ball.
He's irrelevant now. And I think he's still reeling from that. But that's just a little good micro example of what you see happening, is because there is no answer to those things you were saying about like the social emotional learning and all these different pieces that are coming in disguised as they are, because all of that language, all of that theological language had been stripped and had been shunned by any population. So you weren't even able to speak in metaphysical ways. And so now it's coming back in a perverted way. And nobody even possesses the language anymore. I mean, this is part of the reason why Vervaeke, says that theology is going to become a very important field over the next however many years, because we ripped it all apart, and you weren't allowed to say anything theologically in any of the actual institutions and enterprises of the world. Theology was going on in back corners, and I mean, that's in some sense.
And I would just say that all the substitute theologies have proven to be wholly inadequate to the task of orienting a human being toward the highest good.
Well, and that's the part I was going to say about being in my program is at the beginning of your conversation when I was listening. You guys were talking about how, in some sense, you have this systematic way of viewing it, and how the old guard academics, so to speak, are being replaced by this kind of like woke cult. I see that happening actively right now in the school that I'm at. Like, you can see the transition, and like 10 years from now, it's just all of the old science aspect of it is just going to be gone.
Yeah. So I lived through this. So, I'm an English teacher, right? And so I was in graduate school in the middle 90s. And
I was
I
an English
lived,
teacher as well.
yeah. So I lived exactly through this period of time in which all those old guards were being replaced with like true believer postmodernist types, right? To sort of just a catch-all term. I know that there are varieties and variations, etc. But I lived through that, and I watched these sort of declawed lions who stood atop the food chain. Because remember, from like roughly 1950 to like roughly 1990, English departments were the theology departments of the university system in the United States.
Literary criticism was
absolutely
a big deal.
Right. To be a manly academic meant you were an English teacher.
For
period,
sure.
full stop. Right. And so I got to live through that, watching that sort of process happen. And it's interesting that you're watching it happen in the next iteration of a sort of a sunsetting clerisy being replaced by. And I would also say, last thing, I'm sorry I'm banging on this, but in Dostoevsky's novel The Possessed, or The Demons, depends upon what translation you read, it's exactly about this sort of this generational transfer, which the great lions of the revolutionary generation of the 1840s and 1850s get replaced by this truly radical nihilistic generation, which they are the children of the original radicals. And the original radicals are like, God, like, what's going on? Like, what? I thought we had a great thing going here. It's like when they can't recognize that their children learned everything they needed to learn from their fathers, right? And then those children rise up and eat the father and blow up the town. So Dostoevsky was hitting this exact pattern, in the late 19th century. He saw it, and I think we're living just iterations of that pattern.
Right. You can just watch it happening. I mean, it goes to the whole point of what we were saying earlier in terms of wisdom having, in some sense, to be the master and the master emissary relationship of the scientific and clinical knowledge. And because there's no basis for that, I'm actively seeing kind of the more old guard types, in some sense, sticking to the like the language of the DSM and the language of the kind of traditional clinical and like really, but
it's a dead letter.
You can see they don't even know how to defend it in some sense, because they were only able to defend it when everyone else agreed with it. But as soon as there's now pushback against
it's in the book. It's in the book. It's right here.
Right.
It's a document. Jacob, to our conversation earlier.
Not a single one of my classes has the DSM. I am.
That's so great.
I am halfway through. I am halfway through my program. I bought a copy of the DSM. I'm studying it. Not one of my classes. I have had so many classes on social justice and other.
Of course.
But the actual DSM, that's next semester.
That's so good. I love it. We'll get to that. We'll get to that.
Well, no, I was just going to say.
Recognize, of course, that's a fiction, right? Too, right? I mean, that's a convention that we're worshiping as if it were, the tablets.
Right, and that's the complicated aspect of this. Yeah. It's like the new crowd coming in. Their critiques are valid and justified.
Yes, I know.
And that's always what you see is the case. It's like, I mean, it's the same thing of Nietzsche's critique of Christianity was right on the ball. And I say that, as a Christian. So it's
the vapors. Yeah.
Right. Excellent diagnosis, bad prognosis. But I think in some sense that the very fact that you see it being there's like this feeling of surprise and being shocked shows that there was never, in some sense, much to stand on to begin with. And one of my best teachers is he an immigrant from Ethiopia, and he came over here, went to Boston College, went to seminary, Boston College. And then, but also did a dual with a social work degree. And it's interesting watching it because the class is on diagnosing, and it's very interesting watching him bring in certain aspects, kind of what we're alluding to. And so I've been able to have some cool conversations with him. But you can tell he's almost like he's almost scared. I don't know how to quite explain it. Like, he doesn't know whether he ought to say something like alluding to the theological at all, because he's older now, and he's been in Ethiopia. He moved over here when he was like 18, and
Yeah.
I think in some sense fully discarded the theological part of his training and has just gone full on in his career, and he owns a practice and stuff like that, and that's great and everything. But my questions, it's like some of the questions I've asked in class, I can just see him like light up, like questions he never thought he'd be asked by a student.
Yeah. So it's interesting. The history. One of the unremarked upon forces that destroyed the convents and monasteries and seminaries in the Roman Catholic Church in the 60s was a massive influx of Rogerian psychology. You can read some really fascinating accounts of this. So again, Jacob, sort of back to your point, it's that inversion of, rather than psychology bending the knee to theology, it was exactly the opposite. And so the downstream effects of that were absolutely catastrophic, right? I mean, Jacob, I don't have to remind you, you live at a convent with no nuns, or you work at a convent, sorry, at a convent with no nuns. Well, you should look into this. It's absolutely fascinating how the adoption of a therapeutic model destroyed it.
Well, okay. One of the things that
and again, I'm not trying to turn Rogers into some sort of boogeyman here. I'm just saying,
But to add to your point, one of the things that particularly killed the order that runs this shelter is so. Have you heard of the Magdalene laundries?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
So this is that order.
Got it. Okay.
The Good Shepherd.
Yeah.
And what happened was that basically they got thrown under the bus by the Catholic Church.
Yeah.
Which is
very typical, by the way.
Yeah, you have throw the nuns under the bus. Apparently, that is what. But so there were a lot of nuns trying to do very difficult work that nobody else wanted to do.
Yeah.
They did it imperfectly, and this critical spirit of you are doing this imperfectly. Therefore, you are a bad person.
That's right.
Came in.
Yeah.
And all of the nuns got thrown under the bus. Yeah. So that's one of the main reasons there's no more nuns there. Yeah. Right? And I mean, I cannot tell you how many times I have been like, oh, we are failing to do that which this place is good at because there are no nuns here, right? And so it's called the Sisters of the Good Shepherd. So they're known as the Magdalens because they had contemplative sisters, and then they had I forget what they call the non-contemplative.
Active, the active versus the contemplative.
Right. So the contemplative sisters were the ones who were like praying and cloistered and whatever. Yeah. And one of the things that would happen is that the Order of the Good Shepherd, they were called the Magdalens because of the belief that Mary Magdalene was the prostitute, right?
Yeah. Right.
And so they would bring prostitutes off the streets into and to live this life of repentance, right?
And give them work, right? And give them a way to sustain themselves, and
right. And I mean, that's how their part of the problem was they did seem to have adopted this Arbeit macht frei, idea of doing lots of work will make you
and you could see how that could become a very twisted second order abuse.
Right. But so when I look back at this order and how they've been vilified, and they continue to be vilified, like they are still a constant whipping boy of in Ireland, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah, they're getting trounced in Ireland. Yeah.
Constantly.
Yeah.
And when I look at the work that they did, which nobody wants to do, right? And how we're trying to do that work with a secular clergy of social workers and MFTs, marital family therapists and LPCCs and caseworkers, and right. It's just not working.
Yeah. Why?
Part of it is when you devote your life to, like, those nuns lived there, and that their job was ministering to these families. Try to replace that with people who have a 9-to-5 job and go home.
Right. It's not a job, exactly. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
The second thing is, and I don't know how much Gage has hit up against this, but the vast majority of the work I do in both my internships is a bunch of meaningless paperwork, because there is this attempt to supervise, to make sure that we're actually getting work done, right? And the only way of making sure that we're getting work done is by generating a ton of paperwork, so that when you go before the judge, right, it's like, here's this letter I wrote, which says all of the times this person came to my family,
right. So it's accounting. You're just a glorified accountant.
Yeah.
It's rather arbitrary, and it also, in some sense, there's this kind of assumption that it's like for supervisory purposes, but it's like you don't actually get supervised or anything that's going to, in some sense, improve your work and like in some sort of a mentorship where you feel like I'm gaining something from documenting my process, and then someone comes and we reflect on it and we talk about it. That at least you can see some value in that. But it's very bureaucratic in nature, and in some sense, what it does is it actually, at least I found this, I've had to be very intentional about not getting stuck in like modal confusion when I'm actually interacting with my clients, because of these bureaucratic responsibilities I have, puts me in a different mode of thinking and interacting. And this is the people in this little corner who I've had conversations around therapy before, is things like this are one of their major critiques against the field altogether. And it's a very fair point that all of this extraneous stuff prevents you from actually loving and beholding another individual in the way that's appropriate with the relationship you've established. Right. And that really does do a significant portion of the legwork of the work, is like just actually listening to someone in caring about, not like, oh, how do I show them that I care, but actually interested in them as
attending to them as a person qua person. Yeah.
Some of the things these people tell me, it's like, I have no idea how to help with them. Like there's such catastrophic human problems. All I can do is just but hope to hold them, metaphorically.
That's right.
That. And after a number of sessions of doing this, they're helped in that way. And I don't it's like, what am I supposed to write in a progress note about that? Oh, I use this intervention. It's like,
do
you see what I'm saying? Like the there's a disconnect of language between the work that I'm doing and the system that it's a part of.
The process recording, the progress notes, they are just the most ridiculous bullshit that exists in order to supposedly supervise what we're doing.
I thought lesson plans were bad for education.
Yeah, I was just going to say, Gage, like papers and lesson plans and quizzes.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a part of that, and look, we all accept that. We accept
right.
that as part of what you have to do, but there becomes a sort of this crowding out, so that all of that kind of what you would maybe call emissary work, right? Disallows you to sort of encounter in that master space or something like that.
Kale, I know you have to go. I actually have to go in not too long from now either. But we talked about a lot of different things. I would love to continue this conversation. I would love to recruit you to be more involved with Fountain of Comfort, by the way, if I can.
I don't have a license, Jacob, so
that's fine. I still want you involved in Fountain of Comfort. But part of it is actually while I want Fountain of Comfort to have a degree of professionalism to it, that's why I do the counseling student titles and stuff. Ultimately, I think if it's going to be successful, it has to be in the air, as the way Abigail Shrier says, but it has to be the right thing in the air, right?
Yeah.
Not pseudoscience, but actual leadership and authority that is not authoritarian. Actual authority.
That's right.
Actual authority means actually knowing what you're talking about and people wanting to hear what you have to say.
Yeah.
But I will let you tell us about your end off with what you want to talk about before we go.
Oh, I just I hear everything that you said. Your sort of your concerns and your critiques of Shrier's work. I think she's a little bit more nuanced. I think you'd kind of jam on the book to be honest. But I think again, in the world that I operate in, again, not explicitly the professional therapeutic world, parents need to read this, right? Teachers need to read this because you just need to be aware of these sort of alternate authorities that aren't free, right? And so I think that it's worth the time on that, and I think that in the proper sense, I think you would find this is exactly what you would want to have people understand in the profession that you're walking into. So. Yeah.
Okay, I am going to take Kale off the screen so he can go. Gage, I actually have to. I have a supervising. I have supervision in 20 minutes. If you want to keep this going afterwards, you can. But I do want to hear more what you have to think about everything we were saying and. Actually, the whole education thing, I don't think we went in deep on, which is there really is. So when he said the spell of science, there's also the spell of education, where you say, "What's the answer?" And it's like, "Oh, education will fix the things," right? As if propositional knowledge psychoeducation was when I found out how we use the term psychoeducation in our notes. I don't know if you use them the same way we do. But
right. And I've seen the term is used so haphazardly sometimes that I find it kind of hilarious.
It's a magic spell.
It really is. Psychoeducation. Can you tell me what that is? And then nobody knows.
Psychoeducation is me giving advice. That's what psychoeducation is.
So it basically becomes just not even worth having a word for.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
No. Psychoeducation is me spending time trying to tell you things.
Yeah. 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 Right. Right. I guess in some sense, thinking about it in the educational context, a lot of my peers fall into a category where there's a spirituality about the way in which they interact with mental health. which I think is really interesting, because, but it's not a well-informed, it's a very like new age spirituality. And some of that, so obviously that intersects with kind of the woke Marxist aspect to some extent, but it also is very separate at the, like I've had conversations with people that are very much, you can tell, I mean, they're obviously not going to say they don't buy into it, but that's not ultimately what they're coming in at with. But they, in some sense, are trying to grab at some of the things that, like, I think I was trying to talk about with this idea that there's a spiritual connection being formed between the client and the clinician. And but once again, there's no broader frame. And I also am very concerned with, and you've raised concern to this, Jacob, that like in this deconstruction of the, you know, the post-enlightenment era, we have a danger of, in some sense, throwing out the scientific enterprise in the way that it affects, I'm just thinking in the mental health context right now, we have the danger of throwing it out because it's been formed as the basis rather than the theology being formed as the basis. And I can see that going really, really poorly, in what there's underpinnings of that already. And once again, this always comes back to the wisdom piece. It's like, without wisdom, you can't determine the proper discernment between all of these factors, and you don't know where the hierarchy, it's like you don't know where everything fits, because people don't even have a conception of hierarchy anymore, and if they do, it's just bad. And so when that happens, it's always an either or. It's always, and because there's no sense of the master emissary type of relationships between any ideas. And it's through that actual hierarchy of where things fit together, in that it being dynamic in terms of, based off of this situation, you changing all of that is the thing. And it's hard to put that in propositional language. And that's part of the role of the theology, in some sense, that can do that at a high level, and then it implicates down. But again, it's so complicated. How am I supposed to expect these other social work students, in some sense, to have a sense of that while not being a part of a religious tradition? Like, what am I even expecting, I guess, is part of what I get stuck with.
Okay, so I want to talk about a different inversion, which I think talks to what you're saying, which is there is a sense, and Emma would be a great person to talk about this, but there is a sense in which we had this idea that the hard sciences are where the really smart people need to be, and where the right answers matter, and where if the engineer doesn't know the correct answer to how to make the plane fly, then everything's going to fall apart. So that matters. But social sciences, less so. And then in the humanities, anything goes. And whatever bullshit you say, there's no right or wrong answer to, right? And I think what we've started to understand is it's actually the opposite, right? Where in the hard sciences, if you're talking bullshit, reality will assert itself very quickly, and you will realize, no, this is bullshit. Whereas in the social sciences, it is less clear, and which is what makes it even harder to do social science well, because things are so complicated.
There's a delay in the result in a very important way.
Go ahead.
You have to constantly be checking yourself, because nothing's going to like automatically respond against you. And also, technically, the stakes are high. I believe in like immortal souls. The stakes are higher in the humanities.
See, this is the thing. The stakes are higher in the humanities, and that is our society has lost. And I have to blame it on Martin Luther. I really do. I think nominalism and this destruction of hierarchy and competence in including in theology. Like, if you don't believe that there are people who are better and worse at knowing whether or not you're going to hell, which is the most important question, right? Is your soul damned or not? And if there is no such thing as an authority on damnation, then how do you orient yourself in life?
Right, but it's so complicated because obviously all of these movements moving away from that usually come from an abuse of the authority where, right, I mean, you see this in some sense in like in a family structure. It's like a child in some sense will, if in some sense there's an abuse of an authority role, then the child will in some sense try to rebel against it, not in a way that's like a healthy rebellion where they can reintegrate after, but it ultimately becomes a fracturing. And so, I mean, oh, is it the parents' fault? Oh, is it the child's fault? They've strayed away. And it's like, well, both of those are stupid questions in some extent. Is that the relationship between things broke down, and ultimately sin is the reason for that. And it's not sometimes helpful to try and pin the sin on one of the two individuals. That actually is a misunderstanding of sin in a greater sense. And so I just think in terms of, I'm not bringing this up to defend Martin Luther or anything. I agree with everything you said. I'm just saying, in sense, it's like, so what that story should show us is not just like, oh, Martin Luther cast the sin on him. It should show us, look what happened when there was a breakdown in the authority relationship, and then what happened, and how we are still 400 years later reeling from the consequences of the sin that existed in being played out there, because authority didn't, in some sense, represent the divine appropriately, and then the response to that was also inappropriate. Yeah. And so how can we restore that? And that's partly what, these conversations where, a Protestant, a Catholic, and a Jew can talk about this in the context of therapy is so helpful, because it's, in some sense, it's getting out of that whole, like, well, it's their fault, and actually trying to restore the relationship in hierarchy.
Okay, Emma, you're the classicist
What?
here. You're the one who knows all things and is the wisest.
Not what classics means.
Oh, I thought classics meant you knew all things.
No, I just know really old things.
But aren't the old things the most true things?
I don't know. Some of them are, because that's how they persisted this long.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So this gets into what Verbeke says is, where do you go for wisdom? And right. you go for wisdom. So one of the things, I'm also studying substance abuse certificate, and the Serenity Prayer has become my biggest workhorse in therapy, which is
it's a good one for many things.
Give me the strength to change the things I can, the grace to accept the things which I cannot, and the
wisdom to know the difference.
Mm-hmm. And all three of those things are very important, right? And yeah, we've stopped. We don't have the wisdom to know the difference, because some people are like, I want, it's all, I mean, the woke are all about both accepting everything as it is and changing everything at the same time with zero wisdom.
Yep.
Right. I need to go at 1, but I'll just kind of close with just a last thing. I mean, I think in some sense, the wisdom in some sense is something that you have to cultivate in an actual real organic way, where if you just create some sort of a system where like the supervisor is supposed to do this and stuff like that. Now, can the supervisor in some sense truly be a teacher in the proper sense of the word? Surely. But if you don't understand that that's at the core of what teaches wisdom, and people actually having role models and then being able to have a place to practice that out, then if you try and like simulate it in some sense, you're not going to get the wisdom. Even if you have everything checked right, like you have all the legal stuff down, the clinical literature is present, and you're teaching people, and it's all set up in this kind of perfect way, then the spark won't catch in terms of the thing that ultimately not only is long lasting, but also does actual change in people's lives, and isn't some sort of a shallow type of change where it's like, okay, well, this person now develops some coping strategies, which again, this is all really important, but it's like, and now they kind of go back out into the world, but then the coping strategies in some sense can then trick them into thinking that that's actually just what life is about, and that only coping strategies is anytime I experience anxiety or some of these things, coping strategy is my solution. Well, I feel the role. I mean, this is why at least I'm can't say this out loud, but it's like it's an opportunity to give people a sense of their initial encounter with God, and that's really important to me. I don't know that I'd do this if that wasn't what was at the core of it for myself.
So my feeling about my training so far has been what they are actually teaching is how to pretend like you're doing what a therapist should do.
That's a really good way of putting it, right?
And
like ChatGPT.
Yeah, and to really do it well, you need to tap into wisdom. Whatever, and I sincerely mean this. And so one of my supervisors, because my internship is finishing, she gave me a card and she's like, "You have a lot of humility." And I was like, is she being sarcastic? Because like, some people tell me I'm humble. Most people don't. But when people tell me, "Oh, Jacob, you have so much wisdom," I'm like, I plagiarize all of it. And I really do. I plagiarize all of it, right? I read and I see. Yeah.
That's how wisdom works, though. Wisdom isn't new.
That's the thing. That's what's missing. Is that so?
If it's new, it's not wisdom. It might be knowledge.
That's so many people think wisdom is something that a wizard creates.
Why are wizards always old?
But I think nowadays we want young wizards.
Yeah, that's Harry Potter.
Yeah.
All right, guys, I gotta go. Thank you so much.
Me too.
Nice to meet you.
Emma, one of these days you're going to have to start streaming yourself so that you can continue this after we go.
One of these days, I will start streaming myself. Maybe over the summer. Who knows? I have 2 weeks to pass my Greek exam. So after that, we'll see what happens.
Okay, after you pass your Greek exams. Okay, I'm going to end this stream.
See you later.